Have you ever consciously or unconsciously built an elaborate fortress around the parts of yourself you deemed unacceptable, grotesque, or even monstrous? Have you ever felt a profound, almost visceral repulsion when confronted with a certain trait in another, only to feel a faint, chilling echo of that same quality reverberating in the quiet chambers of your own soul? We spend a lifetime meticulously curating our public selves, crafting narratives of virtue, competence, and light, diligently banishing anything that dares to contradict this carefully constructed facade. But what happens to what's banished? It doesn't dissolve into thin air. It descends into the shadowy depths of our unconscious, becoming the very shadow that Carl Jung spoke of, the unacknowledged, repressed, and often disowned aspects of our personality. And it is precisely the fear of this shadow that keeps us shackled. Mainstream thought, with its pervasive emphasis on positivity, conformity, and emotional regulation, often subtly or not so subtly, compels us to suppress these uncomfortable truths. We are taught to be good, to be likable, to fit neatly into the predefined contours of societal expectation. Any deviation, any raw, untamed impulse is swiftly labeled negative and relegated to the dark corners of our inner world. Yet this very act of banishment, this relentless pursuit of an incomplete self, is a profound act of self-betrayal. It was Friedrich Nietzsche, in his stark, unapologetic dissection of human striving, who dared us to peer beyond these conventional moral frameworks. He scoffed at the comforting illusions of easy virtue, suggesting that true greatness, genuine self-mastery, lies not in the denial of our primal impulses, our aggressions, our desires, our capacity for cruelty, but in their conscious acknowledgement, sublimation, and integration. Nietzsche, with his characteristic ferocity, argued that what does not kill me makes me stronger. But what if that which doesn't kill you is precisely the shadow you refuse to even look at? What if the very monsters he warned us about are not external threats, but the unexamined aspects of ourselves, locked away, festering, and quietly dictating our lives from the dungeon of our denial? And here we must pause and ask, do you truly know yourself beyond the curated facade you present to the world and even to yourself? Do you know the depths of your resentment, the true nature of your envy, the insidious whispers of your self-sabotage? Or do you merely skim the surface, terrified of what the depths might reveal? Consider the incandescent genius of Nikola Tesla, a man whose visionary brilliance reshaped the modern world, yet whose life was also marked by profound eccentricity, reclusiveness, and an almost obsessive battle with his own inner landscape. Tesla's mind, a kaleidoscope of electrifying ideas and profound insights, was undeniably intertwined with what many might label his shadowed aspects. His unconventional habits, his solitary existence, his peculiar phobias. Was his fear of germs, his aversion to pearls, his almost superhuman dedication to his work at the expense of all social connection, merely eccentricities? Or were they manifestations of a man wrestling with the raw, untamed forces of his own genius, navigating a world that often misunderstood and dismissed his singular inner reality? His triumphs were inseparable from the very elements that made him an outcast in conventional society, the elements he had to perhaps embrace rather than deny. His profound impact came not from conforming, but from allowing his unique inner world, with all its complexities and perceived imperfections, to manifest. But the shadow is not merely the domain of historical giants or eccentric geniuses. It lies dormant within all of us, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Consider the chilling implications of the Stanford prison experiment, a seminal psychological study where ordinary, psychologically stable university students were arbitrarily assigned roles as guards or prisoners. Within days, the simulation spiraled into a terrifying display of human depravity. The guards, given uniforms and power, swiftly unveiled facets of their personalities they and society likely believed non-existent, becoming sadistic, abusive, and dehumanizing. The prisoners, stripped of their identity, became submissive, broken, and compliant. What was revealed was not a sudden corruption, but the raw, unacknowledged potential for cruelty, for dehumanization, and for profound psychological capitulation lurking beneath the thin veneer of normal consciousness. These were not inherently evil people. They were people whose unexamined shadows, given permission by circumstance, burst forth with terrifying force. The real danger, then, lies not in the existence of these shadows, for they are an intrinsic part of the human condition, an inescapable consequence of our evolutionary heritage and our complex psyches. The real danger lies in our steadfast, often unconscious, refusal to acknowledge them. It is in this denial that the shadow gains its true power. When we refuse to look at our anger, it manifests as passive aggression or destructive outbursts. When we refuse to acknowledge our envy, it morphs into bitter resentment or sabotage. When we suppress our fears, they grow into debilitating anxieties and paralyzing phobias. The fear of the shadow is ultimately the fear of our own wholeness. It is the fear of our untamed potential, both for creation and for destruction. It is the terror of realizing that we are not merely the pure moral beings we wish to be, but a complex tapestry woven from threads of light and dark, virtue and vice, love and malice. We build elaborate internal walls, imprisoning these parts of ourselves, and then wonder why we feel incomplete, why we constantly struggle with internal conflict, why true self-acceptance feels perpetually out of reach. The profound change that the title promises, "When you stop fearing your shadow, everything changes," begins not when the shadow dissipates, for it never truly does. It begins when you cease to run from its spectral embrace, when you finally gather the courage to turn, to face it, to acknowledge its presence, and to integrate its lessons. It is in this act of courageous self-confrontation that the energy trapped in denial is finally liberated, becoming a powerful force for conscious growth, authentic expression, and genuine self-mastery. Only by embracing our full spectrum, the magnificent and the monstrous, the divine and the diabolical, can we truly become whole. Perhaps the fear we harbor towards our own shadows is not a flaw, but a deeply ingrained, almost evolutionary survival mechanism, a mechanism, ironically, that ultimately traps us in a smaller, less potent version of ourselves, perpetually performing a role. Because when we truly examine our persistent patterns, our unbidden reactions, our deepest discomforts, and the pervasive anxiety of self-discovery, we realize we all, in truth, are escaping reality.